Yes, I know. Another Saryn video after what is probably the best video I have ever made, but I promise there's a good reason for this, and it is all due, mostly, to one thing: Blast. And also, I know all of you guys just got a free Saryn Prime from Tenet Live. Yeah, like usual, something new came out or something was reworked, and when you combo it with Saryn, it just breaks the game, which is exactly what happens when you combo her and the newly reworked Blast status. For those of you unaware, Blast was changed from its absolutely horrible enemy accuracy debuff to actually blast enemies. Who would have thought? Stacks 1 through 9 of Blast will all result in their own detonation on the enemy they were dealt to, dealing 30% of your base damage, this taking 1.5 seconds to occur. While capping it off at 10 stacks does have its own unique function, firstly, there is a very powerful interaction present between this and Toxic Lash, her third ability. Lash is complicated, but basically, it will imbue all of your weapons with toxin damage, dealt as a separate hit from your main shot, starting at 30% of your total damage and force proccing a toxin dot on every hit. Mind that this dot is very powerful, scaling off toxin mods applied to your weapon regardless as if they are combined into another element, and faction damage buffs work very well here, as those will multiply your weapon's damage, and then multiply the Lash instance a second time, and then multiply the dot a third time. But here is where things get interesting. The Blast explosion will reproc Lash all by itself, resulting in what is essentially a quadruple dip on faction damage. This is because Blast as a DOT already double dips on it, and since it re-triggers Lash as if it were a bullet, it is dipped again for a third time, and then the dot will repeat that. Now that's great and all, but where this really gets absurd is what happens when we hit 10 Blast stacks or kill an enemy afflicted with Blast. On achieving either of those, an explosion will be triggered, dealing Blast damage in a 5-meter AoE. This instance of damage compounds the current Blast stacks into your base damage times 30%, which is then multiplied by faction damage and any other additional factors, including things like critical hits or body part multipliers like headshots. Even more broken though, is that like procs 1 through 9, this explosion will reproc a very buffed Lash dot on all struck enemies. So what should you use to take advantage of that interaction? Well, I have two very strong options for you guys, the first of those being the Tenet Glaxion. Tenet Glaxion is quite a strong weapon on its own, but when combined with Saryn, like many other things, it just fucks shit up. Glaxion has base cold damage, which will then combine with whatever progenitor element you chose, which should be heat, to give you innate blast. The beam shot also chains up to 3 enemies within 7 meters of the previous chain, each doing 50% of the prior's damage, but retaining things like status chance. Uniquely, if any punch through is modded on, any additional targets hit by the main beam will also generate their own set of chains. This punch through comes from a new mod, Rifle Elementalist, which has the other benefit of 90% more status damage, working to buff Blast even further as a final multiplier. Besides that, this is a relatively standard build, double galvanized mods and both crit mods. The Bane is very important, don't skip that if you can. Then I'm using Radiated Reload for an extra aptitude status and more reload speed. Rounding it off is Hammer Shot for even more crit damage and status chance, which when looked at, gives us a 65% chance for blast per tick of damage. Sinister Reach is also the default X-list for beam weapons, pretty self-explanatory. Something important to know about Saryn and weapon style builds on her is that literally anything works. If you're coming from TennoCon where you just got a free Saryn and you're a bit newer, don't feel intimidated by all these crazy weapons and mods or whatever. Your loadout right now will become an absolute monster with her, so just use whatever and apply the principles you learned from this video. But because of that, I'm going to showcase a budget build for you newer Tenno, something I don't do very often. All of these mods are easily accessible, the hardest to achieve probably being Venom Dose, but open a few relics and get 10 to 15 platinum, and buy it. Trust me, it's going to make your weapons deal so much more damage. Just make sure you use Warframe Market. The in-game trade chat is awful. But for those of you looking to really max out her potential, you should use this instead. 220 range brings the spread radius on spores to 35.2 meters, which means that you will be fully armor stripping every enemy you encounter due to this ability's synergy with +2 corrosive stack Archon shards. Besides that, high strength for bigger buffs, Venom Dose to juice our weapons with corrosive damage, while a combination of catalyzing shields and 3 auger mods, 2 on a pistol and 1 on Saryn herself, gives us a 1 cast shield gate with Molt. Arcane-wise, Energize and Acceleration. The first 2 manage energy, and the latter to buff our fire rate since we did not have room for it on Glaxion. This build is, very strong as expected, but you know what I have for you? Something a little crazier than that if you're into it. Phenmor was one of the very first incarnates, and while I believe many people now overlook this absolute monster of a gun for other more meta options, this thing still slaps, and when we apply everything I just talked about here, shit's crazy. Why is that exactly? Well, remember when I told you that the blast AoE on kill puts a multiplier of your base damage? Phenmor has a 5th evolution perk that provides non-critical hits a 50% chance to deal 2000% more of that, which is multiplicative to other base damage sources like primary merciless. Now apply that to blast and the quad dip toxin dot, and your Phenmor is turned into a disgustingly strong AoE monster. These toxin dots are hitting in the millions. The build on Phenmor looks as shown: double 60/60s for blast with a bane, some punch through, and fire rate from shred and double galvanized. Elementalist is going to be present on like 90% of all builds going forward because we're in a crazy status meta, and Vigilante Armaments is the only practical mod to put here, but if you have a Riven, use that here instead. Charging Phenmor can be slightly annoying, so to remedy that, I'm using Magus Lockdown, which will freeze enemies in place for easy headshots. While this may be my 5th Saryn video, it's really hard to see crazy shit like this and not go, yes, I want to make a video on that, because come on, y'all love it, and I certainly do too. Quad dipped toxin dot, that's just insane. Has there ever been anything in the game like that before? Regardless, thank you for watching. I hope you learned something from this video, and if you'd like to support me further, my Patreon and YouTube memberships are linked down below, which, speaking of, thank you to all of my wonderful supporters on there already. I couldn't do what I do without y'all. Appreciate you lots. Can we hit 50k before the month ends? That'd be hype as fuck. I'll see y'all soon. Peace.